Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome to another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. All eyes will be on the Gaza Strip on Saturday to see what happens and if more hostages are released or Hamas stands by its threat to stop the release of hostages and violate the ceasefire. The quandary for Israel after President Donald Trump issued his ultimatum that he wants to see all of the hostages released Saturday by noon is the following. In Israel, there's a little belief that Hamas will agree to release all the hostages, especially knowing that Israel plans to resume fighting no matter what. Hamas, in turn, faces its own dilemma. It knows that if it releases everyone, Israel will resume the war due to pressure from within the coalition. But it also knows that if it doesn't release, Israel might also resume the war. That's why, from Hamas's perspective, the rational move might be to hold on to at least some of the hostages as leverage to pressure Netanyahu into further concessions. But if the fighting does resume, and Netanyahu has threatened that it would resume with intensity, this time will be different for two key reasons. First, Donald Trump, not Joe Biden, is president. Trump has already declared his full support for Israel. He's been giving it unprecedented diplomatic cover, and he's already unlocked arms shipments that Biden had frozen. This does change the equation. Secondly, as Israeli public opinion is shifting. While many Israelis support the deal to bring the hostages home, some 70% of Israelis want to see the deal continue. Israelis are also enraged by the images that have come from Gaza. We see that Hamas is still in control, still dictating terms, as well as the horrific conditions of the men, or Eli and Ohad, who were released last Saturday. There's growing anger not just toward Hamas, but also toward Netanyahu and the government for not finishing the job. And that's why if the war does resume, it will likely be far more aggressive. Netanyahu, for his part, might use this public anger to justify a more aggressive return to war. So while Hamas may think that holding hostages gives it leverage, if Israel does go back in, it won't be with the same restraints as before. All of this is worth keeping in mind. And that's what we're going to be discussing on today's episode with my guest, Herb Keinon, longtime veteran writer, journalist with the Jerusalem Post. He's now a senior analyst, but he's also been covering diplomatic affairs for the paper for the last 30-something years. Herb has been a good friend and a colleague for many years, and someone I look to often to get insight and context of the big issues that Israel is dealing with. Have a listen. Herb, it's great to have you back on the podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
I mean, we're talking, and I don't even know where to begin to some extent because there's so much going on and it changes by the, not the day, the hour here. But we are heading to a countdown to Saturday, to Shabbat, when more hostages are supposed to be released. And it remains unclear exactly who will be released, if anyone will be released, how many will be released, and what will happen to this ultimatum that President Donald Trump has issued that he wants to see everyone come back by noon on Saturday, not in a, I think how do you call it? Not in a drib or a drab, and not in, 1, 2, 3, or 4, but everyone. That would be something like 40 living hostages who are believed to be still alive inside Gaza out of the 70 or so that are still there. I mean, when you look at, if you had to look into your crystal ball, how does this play out?
I mean, that's a tough question, right? I mean, that's a tough question. My gut feeling is that what we're going to see on Saturday is that Hamas will have backed away from their ultimatum or their threat not to release the 3 that they're supposed to release, and that those 3 will be released, right? I mean, that's what I see happening. Whether or not, I mean, I find it very doubtful that they're going to release like all the hostages. I just think that they're just going to step back from the precipice that they placed themselves in on when it was on Sunday or Monday, saying that they're not going to release these hostages. I think they will release them. I'm not sure, beyond that, if we can really expect anything.
But that puts Israel into something of a dilemma, because Israel has said that if they don't, we all kind of watched with a bit of awe as all these different statements came out of the Security Cabinet meeting after they met on Tuesday night, when one statement was, we support Donald Trump's plan. Then another statement was, we want the deal to continue. Then another statement was, we're going to resume fighting, intense fighting, if the Hamas doesn't give us back all the hostages from stage one, which would be 9 apparently living hostages out of the remaining batch of the 33 of stage one. So Israel's dilemma, as I see it, is if Hamas gives the 3, which is what they're supposed to do based on stage one of this deal, what does Netanyahu do? He's under pressure from the coalition to resume the fighting. On the other hand, he's under pressure from the public to keep getting back the hostages. How does this play out from his perspective?
Look, I think it's interesting when you look at those, you look at the 2 statements that were put out. What was interesting in the statements is at no time did he say all the hostages. He said, get back our hostages. Now, our hostages could be the 3 that were supposed to come out, or they could be the 9 that are supposed to be, come out in the phase one. He never said all of them. And I think that's these things are, at least the second statement, I think, was worded very carefully. I think his pickle is less with the Israeli public and less with the coalition. I think it's more with Donald Trump, right? I mean, because what did Trump say? Trump said, if it was me, right, if they're not out by noon on Saturday, all hell was going to break loose. Meaning that Israel, if they had any gumption, any backbone, any spine, that's what they would do. And remember, I mean, Trump likes strength. Trump respects strength. Trump was angry at Netanyahu for Netanyahu, apparently, according to Trump's telling, not willing to go along with him with the killing of the Iranian Islamic Qasem Soleimani a couple of years ago, right? Thinking that, well, this was a sign of weakness on Netanyahu's part. So I think what Netanyahu's dilemma is how he placates Trump here, more than even how he placates the coalition or the Israeli public.
I mean, this is kind of, you've covered Netanyahu for a long time. He's always kind of, needling or trying to balance act the way to manage all the competing interests that he has, right? He has, on the one hand, he doesn't want to defy Donald Trump. He doesn't want to look weak, as you pointed out, with Donald Trump. He saw what Donald Trump did to the presidents of Colombia, who didn't want to let those planes land with the illegal immigrants. He saw what Trump did to Canada. I always say about Canada, I mean, like, what have they ever done anything to the world? Like, yeah, they're just good people. They're always saying they're sorry. I mean, but he's like, he cracks down on Canada, on Mexico, on China. I mean, the last thing Netanyahu needs is for Trump to turn on Israel. On the other hand, he's got his coalition problems, and then he's also got the Israeli public. 70% of Israelis want the hostage deal to continue. And according to that poll, Herb, 55% of his own voters want the deal to continue.
Right. Look, Yaakov, the way I say this to see this thing playing out is it's not as if from now until Saturday, Bibi or the prime minister or his people are not going to be talking to the White House, right? I think there'll be a lot of conversations going back and forth with Washington in order for him to explain to Trump what he is going to do and why he's going to do it. I'm not sure, like you said, the public is very much in favor of these deals, although it's, it's like a Chinese water torture, the way they're being done. I find it hard to believe that on noon on Shabbat, if Hamas gives back, the 3 that they're supposed to give back, that he's going to go back, full force into Gaza, which means, again, calling up the Miluimnikim and the whole thing. I find that hard to believe. But like I said, he's got to worry now about Trump. So I think there's going to be a lot of background conversations from now until then to come to some kind of understanding with Trump as to why we're doing what we're doing, so that Trump doesn't view this as a sign of weakness on our part.
I mean, let's talk about that relationship between Trump and Netanyahu. It seemed that the meeting that they had last week went quite well. The relationship had its ups and downs. We famously remember how Trump used different curse words when referring to Netanyahu after he had left office. You mentioned how he felt that Netanyahu did not stand by him with regards to the Soleimani elimination or targeted killing. They did seem to get along, and it seemed that Trump, to a great extent, last week when the two of them met, I think was Tuesday in Washington, D.C., was really trying to help him out, was talking tough, threw out this Gaza bombshell of removing all the people, taking an ownership position, which he's only doubled down on now that the Palestinians won't even be able to go back. It was as if he was trying to help Netanyahu with his coalition problems.
Right, definitely, definitely. I mean, if you want to see the difference in optics, take a look at the meeting he had last week with Netanyahu and compare that with the meeting he had yesterday with King Abdullah. Right? I mean, it was night and day. He didn't do anything to try to, make things easier for Abdullah. He did do a lot in that meeting with Netanyahu to make things easier for Netanyahu. And that's important. Those optics are important. Those optics are seen throughout the region, right? If you look at the meeting that he had with Netanyahu last week and compare it to his meeting with Abdullah yesterday, and you're sitting in the region, you're looking, who does the president like? Who does he favor? I mean, it's crystal clear. And that's an important message, and I think that's come out. There were all the reports about the rocky relationship that Netanyahu had with Trump as a result of him calling Biden and congratulating on the victory. It seems to me from looking at that meeting last week that they've gotten over that. And one thing I had to laugh about, all the speculation about how bad that relationship was or became because of that meeting. They say that, Trump is vindictive. It's going to hold this against Netanyahu. Well, if Trump is going to hold this, have a vindictive streak against Netanyahu over his calling Biden, imagine how he's feeling now about the Iranians who tried to assassinate him twice.
Right. And now there's even a possibility that he might sit down and talk to the Iranians, right? He did make sounds that might be the direction that he's going in, and taking advantage of the vulnerability or the weakness that has been found with Iran since the war. Israel's successful airstrikes against Iran, neutralizing its air defense systems, but also degrading and significantly weakening the proxies. There is an opportunity to try to iron out maybe, or hammer out a better deal with Iran. It seems that that's what Trump wants to do based on how he's been talking.
It's interesting, Yaakov, because I think, the big news from last week's meeting was the Gaza plan bombshell. But I think under the radar, what we're not paying attention to is I think that one of the reasons that Netanyahu wanted to have this meeting so soon was to get on the ground floor, realizing that Trump does want to start some kind of negotiations with the Iranians and wanting to be there in the beginning to find out where exactly he's going, what the Americans expect from the Iranians, what the Americans are willing to give to the Iranians, and more importantly, to get a feeling from Trump about what happens, what the Americans will do or allow us to do if those negotiations break down. I think that was a big part of the conversation, that because of all the noise over Gaza, we're not paying sufficient attention to. But I think that's a major agenda issue right now.
Going back to talk about the hostage deal for a moment, you wrote the other day just kind of about this whole convoluted structure and the way that it was put together with the different stages, and how it really, to some extent, it was meant to maximize Israeli pain and suffering. And we definitely see that. I mean, the release of the 3 male hostages last Saturday, Eli Or and Ohad, and seeing them so emaciated and remembering, and everyone, every Israeli, definitely every person around the world, Jew, was their mind was going back in history to a dark period of the Jewish people when we thought that would never happen again. We thought that the Jewish state of Israel would never allow those images to ever be seen again, but they were seen again. I mean, doesn't that chip away also to an extent at the success of this war?
It does if you just measure the success of the war by that image, right? And I think this is something that it would be a mistake to do. You're gonna have to judge whether or not we succeeded in Gaza, not by what happens tomorrow or the next day, but rather what happens a year from now, right? We'll see what happens in Gaza, what transpires in Gaza, and then we'll be able to decide whether or not we've been successful or not. But to say, well, you've got these emaciated hostages coming out, and as a result of that, Israel lost the war in Gaza or Hamas won. I don't think that's the way we should gauge it. I think we have to take a longer view and give ourselves some time to determine, what's going to be there.
No, I tend to think you're right, Herb. But on the other hand, Israelis, right? We're a very emotional people. We're driven to a great extent by the gut, maybe a little less sometimes by the rational thinking. and you see hostages come back like that, there's two things that happen. One is, what the hell did we just do? I mean, how did this happen to these people? You look at the Hamas guys who are still there with their AK-47 Kalashnikovs, dozens, hundreds, the green bands that they wear on their head. Someone told me they call them the ninjas because, they kind of look like that. But they're standing there. So Hamas still in control, still able to put together these rallies and release festivals. And Israelis who, we've destroyed lots of Gaza. We've killed most Hamas men. We've eliminated almost all their leadership. We've destroyed almost all their infrastructure. They're left with almost no rocket capability. But still, they are there. So Israelis have to say to themselves, one second, our hostages come back emaciated, looking like Holocaust survivors, and our victory over Hamas has not been achieved because they're still able to control Gaza and they're still present.
Right. Yaakov, I mean, I have no response to that. You're right. I mean, but again, it's what we see right now at this minute. But there's been great changes in Gaza. Let's not forget that, right? I mean, Hamas is no longer a terrorist army. They have guerrillas. The irony about, them showing up with their uniforms and their headbands at these shows when they release the prisoners. Once the cameras are off and the Israeli soldiers are back in there, they shed those uniforms and they hide behind the skirts of the women and underneath the rooms of the kids, right? So I think we got to remember too the successes we did have there, and we destroyed their ability to carry out an October 7th. Has it been absolute victory? Obviously not, because they're still there. But let's wait and see what happens, right? Let's wait and see what happens. I think Israel does retain a lot of leverage. I think even Hamas wants to rebuild Gaza, or to have Gaza rebuilt. And I think with the U.S. on our side here, we could kind of condition any restructuring of Gaza into Hamas not being there, not having control either militarily or even governmentally of the Strip. Right? How's that going to happen? Because you're going to have, the Egyptians who get more. I mean, it's interesting. Now, all of a sudden, after 16 months, now the Arab countries are going to meet in Saudi Arabia and come up with a plan. Right? Why? That's because of the pressure coming from Trump. So things are moving. Is it Hamas signing, like the Japanese did on a ship, surrender? Definitely not. But let's wait and see where it goes. Because remember, what are the goals? The goals are to get them out of Hamas, no longer have civil military control. And we'll see. It's not over yet.
Herb, let's talk about Trump's plan. This bombshell of a plan, which he dropped on Netanyahu and on the world last week, about taking an ownership position of Gaza, removing everyone from Gaza. First, it seemed that the Palestinians would be able to come back to Gaza. Now he's saying they won't be able to come back to Gaza. He doesn't even talk about America owning Gaza. He says, I'm going to own Gaza. I mean, how do you understand? What is this a plan? Is this an idea? Is this just throw stuff on the wall and see what sticks? Is it, I'm just trying to shake things up? Is it just to get people to do things differently? Like you mentioned, you're right. For the first time, finally, the Arab countries are getting together and saying, okay, we're going to come up with some idea of our own, right? Which they haven't done until now. So what is Trump doing?
Look, I mean, is it a detailed plan with, 24 steps consecutively how you do this? Obviously not. He threw out an idea. The idea has shaken everybody up, right? It's jiggling the box. It's changing our frame of references, right? Because remember, up until Trump talked about relocating Gazans, if you would have said that on this podcast, well, maybe Israel should consider relocating Gazans, everybody would say, Yaakov, you're a racist. You can't go down that line. That's no longer the case now. This is something now that's part of the conversation. You could be for it or you could be against it, but it's now a legitimate idea. And I think that's changed the conversation. Also, I'm not saying anything new here, but, up until now, the only options to solving Gaza or the Israel-Palestinian conflict has been a two-state solution, right? I mean, what John Kerry would always say, there's only two options, right? It's either two states or one state and Israel becoming apartheid. I say, well, maybe not. Maybe there's another option. And I think that what Trump has done is kind of, opened up the faucet on that and allowed for some other ideas to come out. This is one idea. Is it the only idea? No, but maybe there will be other creative ideas. He's kind of opened up he's opened up the playing field. So other ideas, which up until now couldn't even get onto the playing field because people wouldn't allow them to go on. Now they can be discussed. I think that's a positive thing.
I mean, you mentioned the two-state solution. Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State under Biden, was still pushing the two-state solution towards at the very end of his term in office. Not to mention, I looked this up a few days ago, just a few weeks after October 7th, he was, I think, in Doha or one of these other countries, and again was talking about we still stand committed to the two-state solution after they had just massacred 1,200 people. Now, not that I'm saying that was he naive, was he wrong? We could argue, but it was this being stuck in this one paradigm. And Donald Trump, whether you like him or not, has kind of flipped that whole paradigm now on its head. But the question really is, what does Israel want to see happen here, right? And I think that's something that's always troubled me, is that the prime minister, or at least this prime minister, has never really said, what does he want to see happen?
That's a good question. You're right. I mean, you're right. We've never laid out our end game, and I think one of the reasons why was maybe we were afraid to say it, right? I mean, would Israelis like to see Gazans relocated, or think that this might be a way to solve at least the Gaza problem? I think a lot of Israelis would probably go there, but it was just taboo to say it. And now it's no longer taboo to say it. Just about the two-state solution, I think another thing that, people forget, two-state solution to West Bank and Gaza with a safe passage from Gaza to the West Bank. I mean, do you imagine the Israeli public right now allowing a safe passage, not right now, but for a generation, allowing a safe passage of Gazans to go through the kibbutzim on the way to Judea, on the way to Nir Hebron? That's where the passage is going to. I mean, can you imagine that happening? It's, people say that this Trump plan is fantastical. That's no less fantastical, right? That's no less of a fantasy to think that the Israeli public would be willing to go along with something like that, or that we're gonna live in peace now and neighborly relations with the Palestinians just like that. That's no less of a fantasy, I believe, than what Trump put out there. Is this plan something that is realistic, something that can be implemented? I don't know. But at least it's a different way of looking at things, which is good, because it could open up other options.
Let's talk for a moment about Jordan and Egypt, because I think that, we saw King Abdullah's visibly shaken visit to the Oval, and how he did not get, as you mentioned, Herb, the same greeting and warmth from Donald Trump as Netanyahu did. Sisi has yet to visit, and there are reports that he's now postponing his visit, if not canceling it. Trump is still pushing Jordan and Egypt as they have lots of land, they can spare some for the Palestinians and to let them go into Gaza. But we're seeing there's another side to the story. I'm curious what you think. Jordan, an ally of Israel. We have a peace treaty. They keep our eastern border quiet. We don't have to allocate forces there. We don't have to worry about a Hamas-like entity in Jordan. We don't have to worry about ISIS in Jordan. Egypt, one of the pillars of stability here in the region, is the peace treaty, the Camp David Accords that were brokered by Jimmy Carter, who passed away recently, and Menachem Begin and Sadat back in '79. We're coming up on, the 50th anniversary almost of 45 now of those 46 of those accords. But the Egyptians are now beefing up forces along the border and saying to the president, if you cut off our military aid that we get from you, $2 billion every year under the Camp David agreement, who knows? Maybe the treaty is off the table. I mean, what is Israel? If somebody said to Netanyahu, Do you want 2 million Palestinians in Jordan? Do you want 2 million Palestinians in the Sinai? What would his answer be?
Look, Trump has said, right? Trump has said Jordan and Egypt. He also said that there's other countries that could get involved with this. We don't know what those other countries are. I mean, some mentioned Indonesia, some mentioned Albania. We don't know. Look, I mean, Egypt is talking about how this is an existential threat to its national security. Is it? I mean, if they take in 1 million Palestinians, that's an existential threat to their national security. Jordan took in 700,000 Syrians. They managed, right? So, I mean, some of this could be overblown rhetoric that we might want to take with a grain of salt. Is Egypt going to break off the peace treaty with Israel? Look, for us, that would be a disaster. But it would also be a disaster for Egypt as well. They also need that peace treaty. They also, in the situation that they're in right now, the economic situation they're in right now, the problems they have with Sudan and Ethiopia, the last thing they need to do as well is to worry about a front with Israel. So I think we have to take some of this rhetoric with a little bit of a grain of salt. Would it cause instability in Jordan? Probably it'll cause some instability in Jordan. But I imagine the Americans are also, would be talking with the king and saying there's certain guarantees that we could give you. I don't think that, Trump is saying take in 1 million Palestinians and that's the end of it. There's stuff that they'll be getting from America in return, which might, make it more palatable for them to do that. Again, I'm speaking just completely speculative, but it's part of a deal, and we don't know what the Americans are offering these other countries right now.
I mean, I'm just trying to imagine for a moment as you're speaking, Herb, if you wanted to move 1 million Palestinians, 500,000 from Gaza to Jordan, the best way to do that would be they leave through the Kerem Shalom crossing and they drive, I think, Road 22, which is that road, or 232. I know, 22. I'm getting my roads wrong, but the one that goes along the border with Egypt until Eilat. And then they cross over into Jordan near Aqaba. I mean, can you imagine for a moment that we would watch thousands of buses, I guess, doing this and transporting people? I mean, it's so far-fetched to some extent.
Did you ever imagine that you would see 1.5 million Gazans move from northern Gaza to southern Gaza in a matter of 2 weeks?
You're right. No. Listen, anything's possible if this is what's going to happen, right?
No, but again, I think that I find it difficult to imagine a situation where they're going to forcibly remove Gazans. But I can't imagine a situation where someone will say that those Gazans who want to leave, right, can leave. And then I think you'll see a large number of Gazans leave because they don't want to live there, right? They're trapped there. It's another great irony. For years we've been hearing about how Gaza is an open air prison. So now we're saying, well, we're going to let the inmates out. And the world is saying, no, you can't. You got to keep them in prison. I mean, this, I think, another thing that Trump did here was just hold up a mirror to the hypocrisy of the world here. You're screaming about the humanitarian situation in Gaza, which is dire. So help ease it. But they're saying, no, they have to stay there and suffer. There's something.
Because Herb, as you know, and I know, the Palestinians really are, to an extent, I think, one of the most miskin people in the world, to the good Palestinians, the innocent ones, because no one cares about them. The Egyptians don't care about them. Their own leaders don't care about them. The Jordanians don't care about them. The Saudis don't care about them. They had been weaponized for so long by Europe and the Arab world as a tool through which to weaken and attack Israel. And no one cares to help them unless it's to undermine Israel. And Trump, as you're right, is to some extent showing the world how they're just a bunch of hypocrites.
Right. Ironically, Trump is showing empathy with the suffering of the Palestinians. Yeah. He's saying, I don't want them to suffer anymore, right? I want to move them out so they won't suffer anymore. And the world is saying, no, you can't move them out because that's ethnic cleanup. He said, I'm not ethnic cleanup. I'm doing it for their own good. And I think a lot of the Gazans would like to do that. At least a lot of the young Gazans would like to, jump on that bandwagon if it was there for them. But the world is saying, or the Arab world is saying, no. You got to stay there. You got to suffer because eventually you're going to go back into Israel proper, right? I mean, like you said, they're weaponizing it as a tool against us.
Yeah. I want to shift gears in the minutes we have left and just talk about the political quandary that the Prime Minister of Israel finds himself in. You mentioned earlier that he wants to get along with Trump. He doesn't want to be seen as defying Trump. He wants to have that good relationship. That's good for him, by the way, also politically important to point out. One of the things that Netanyahu can showcase is I can work with this president. I can get strategic benefits from this president, like I did in his first term, the moving of the embassy, the recognition of the Golan, and pulling out of the JCPOA, the Iran deal, all that different stuff. But I want to take you back to Tuesday after the announcement by the president of this revolutionary idea. Bezalel Smotrich embraced it with both arms. There was noises coming from Ben Gvir's direction that he might be coming back into the coalition. It seemed that Netanyahu is safe, nothing to worry about anymore. His coalition is good to go till 2026. Now that's not necessarily the case anymore. I mean, what has changed? And what do you think the Prime Minister's chances are of keeping his coalition together?
I find it hard to believe that the Smotrich, right, is going to bring down this government with Trump as president, right? I mean, another question they asked at the press conference with Netanyahu, with the president, was what about annexation of Yudav Shomron? And Trump said, well, I'll let you know in another month. Right, we're going to come up with a policy. So I mean, there's a lot of hope on the right and it's Smotrich's party that this is a tremendous opportunity. We have a president there that we can work with, that understands what we want ideologically. We can work with them. I don't think they want to be in a position where they're going to bring down a government when you have that opportunity, right? He's going to have to weigh things, right? What's more important for me? Is it more important for me to be able perhaps to realize my ideological dreams for the first time ever? Or I'm going to bring down the government if it doesn't renew an intense war in Gaza like it said it would. I tend to think that he's going to stay in the government because he realizes that there's an opportunity with Trump that he wants to take advantage of, and that might not come again for a generation.
Do you really think, Herb, that annexation is on the cards with this president? I mean, and I'll just to reinforce the question. I think we all thought that when he was coming back as president, the flagship or the primary foreign policy agenda was, obviously Russia-Ukraine, ending that war, important to him, but the Saudi-Israel normalization, this would bring him the Nobel Peace Prize. All this stuff, doesn't it have to be looked at? Gaza plan, hostage plan, annexation plan, doesn't it all have to be looked at through the prism of that main objective of Saudi-Israel normalization for the president?
Yeah, but if you're talking about his political survival and whether the coalition can survive, the question is not whether I think annexation is realistic or not. It's whether Smotrich thinks annexation is realistic or not, or whether he thinks that with Trump there's a possibility that he will be able to annex at least part of Yudav Shomron, the Bikata, the Bikata Yarden, the Jordan Valley, yeah, around Yerushalayim. And I think he's probably thinking that, yes, we do have an opportunity to do that. Whether I think this is something that Trump is going to allow or not. Look, in the deal of the century, right, back in January 2020, it was on the table for at least a day. Right, and then it
went off, and then we had the Abraham Accords, so,
right. So again, so maybe this is a way of getting the Saudis on board. Who knows? Maybe he's trying to pull the same rabbit out of the hat. But I think the question has to be, what is Smotrich? Because the question again was about his political future, the coalition's political future. I think Smotrich probably thinks that it is possible to do things right now, and that's why I don't think he would leave this government. I don't think Smotrich is going to bring down the government. Which raises another interesting issue. This is a completely different issue. What does this do with the whole Haredi draft bill, right?
Right.
Because I think it's connected. I think this is the Haredim are going to get a better deal now as a result of this as well, because Smotrich is not going to want to bring down the government even over the draft bill. Right?
It's really, because Netanyahu is going to say, listen, you're going to bring down the right-wing government that could one day get annexation from this president over drafting Haredim, who anyhow are never going to draft. You'd have to be crazy for that. And it could work. I mean, and with this, I'll leave you, Herb, but it's just amazing to me how this prime minister, through everything he's been through, everything he's done to this country, some good, some bad. I mean, the architect of policy that led to October 7th, the failures of October 7th, the war that has ensued, and he is still able to pull through. He's on trial. We saw that this week, a number of days in court. He had the surgery recently. It's pretty remarkable what Netanyahu is able to pull off.
It is indeed, but I think there's an expiration date. And I think the expiration date is October 2026, right? Which isn't that far away. October 26 is when the elections have to be held, right? And that's not that far away, Yaakov.
Why do you think it's an expiration date for this government? You don't think he would run again?
I think he'll run again. I don't think he can win again.
You don't think he can win again? Wow, interesting.
No. I don't think he can put together a coalition. I think you're gonna have a different party in there, right? You might have Bennett forming a party, you might have other actors forming a party, but I don't see, because of what you said, because of the failures that led up to October 7th, which is something that this country's not going to forget that quickly, even if there's no commission of inquiry, right? It's a trauma that we've all lived, that we all remember. You talk to people on the streets and they say, everybody, you got a clean sweep. Now, you're seeing a clean sweep in the IDF. A lot of folks want to see a clean sweep politically as well. So again, I think he can last until the next elections, but then I think his era is over.
I'd love for a clean sweep in the Knesset, Herb. I really think they all need. I mean, to me, it's really just remarkable how the people who it's such a stain on them, everything they've done. That we're in this situation, and no taking of responsibility by anyone in government is just remarkable in my mind.
And I think, Yagwe, I think a lot of people believe that and feel that, which is why I think that when there is an election, and again, there has to be in October 2026, there will be an accounting.
Yeah.
And I think you'll see a whole different political scenario.
Herb Keinon, senior analyst, writer for the Jerusalem Post, and a good friend. It was great to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. And to all our listeners and viewers, as always, you can find us where podcasts can be found: Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and the website of Times of Israel. We'll be back next week on Monday with another episode of the Jewish People podcast. In the meantime, let's hope for that